You followed the advice in all the business books about how to build systems in your business and get organized. And yet, deadlines are slipping, stuff is falling through the cracks, and no one knows who is doing what. You and your business are not broken. The problem is how you are trying to systemize your business using methods that just aren't built for teams like yours. So here at ProcessDriven since 2018, I have been studying what the Boys Club has published, and I've found the gaps in their approach. What I've come to realize in that time is the main difference between systemizing a big team and a small team is the angle of approach. And obligatory reminder, you can learn more about my approach in the description below. You see, all of these approach in their own shape and form, prescribe a top-down method of building systems. I call this a strategic approach, which sounds good, right? It sounds fancy. But what I've found more effective for small teams is what I like to call a tactical approach or a bottom-up approach to building systems. Let me define each of them. It'll make more sense. So strategic approach begins with the leadership of the business, usually with the CEO or business owner. And it requires that leader to outline their full vision and strategy for the business and use that strategy to prescribe downward all of the processes and policies and values and everything else that needs to happen. This person is usually going to be creating beautiful charts called process maps that look something like this. They'll be creating policy binders that might look like this. And in most cases, they'll be recording many Loom videos, recording how to do each thing in the business. It takes a really long time. So what this approach ends up doing is going from our brains into some kind of vision of some kind that we share. And then it goes back into some kind of tactical reality. Although a lot of the times these frameworks, these books, they don't even cover this half of the equation whatsoever. They just assume you'll figure that out. The problem with this is what ends up happening is we end up stopping here. We create some kind of shared vision and then nothing else happens. We now know, oh, here's what we think should happen and how our business should work. But we never actually change our behaviors to make the business match that vision that we have. So if I really want to cut right to the chase, this old approach to building systems is really about creating some kind of work of fiction that you all enjoy enough that you want to make it a reality. And while yes, the Harry Potter series did end up creating Harry Potter world, when it comes to our small businesses, there aren't too many works of fiction that we believe in enough to bring into reality. Now, let's contrast that for a minute with the bottom-up approach to building systems, what I will call the tactical approach, and what's quite different than what the Boys Club preaches. So what we teach here at ProcessDriven is that to systemize a business, we don't need to start with our heady theories and imagination of what could be. No. Instead, if we really want to systemize a team, let's start with the front lines of what actually happens on the team. So the first part of any tactical project, what we do here at ProcessDriven, which is unlike any other approach out there, is we focus on task management. What's happening? Who's doing it? When is it happening? From there, we move on to why is it happening? Where are we storing it in terms of software and technology? And only after that do we think about how it happened. In other words, the policies and procedures. That is our last step, not our first, which is a lot like the old school approach, except in the opposite order and with a focus on what is actually going to make our day-to-day work different. Because in this how stage, we're going to be talking about SOPs. We're going to be talking about checklists. We're going to talk about things that make day-to-day work easier, but only once we know what is actually going to make a difference in our day-to-day, rather than just focusing on this big picture vision. We're going to have the data to say, wow, at this point, we spend a lot of time on this thing because we track what we spend our time on. And we know, hey, if we just fix this, it'll make a big difference. And we can use that to improve how we do that thing. We're not guessing here. We're basing it on what actually is happening in the business, which is fundamentally different than the pie in the sky dreams of the traditional approach. But actually, if you want to get really nerdy about it, before the traditional approach that the business boys talk about in their systemizing books, there actually was an approach before that was a lot like this. So really, we're just replacing the old approach with the older approach and making it a little bit more modern. But that's a nerdy side tangent. Let's move on. This new approach is about making system building a game that every single person on your team can play, whether they're technophobes, whether they're very system minded, whether they're not process people at all. They can be involved with this. So, this is a low barrier to entry and low skill, really, required to be involved. Whereas the old approach really relies on the top brains on your team gathering together, your most valuable people's time being spent on this. And if they don't have time or they don't have attention, sorry, you're out of luck. The old school approach is around theorizing what should be. The new school approach is around letting work happen and observing the trends. In this new school approach, the work that you're doing becomes almost like an assembly line, and each person on your team can be focused on their part of the assembly line, what is actually happening, the high volume activities that are taking up their time. They can use those to make the assembly line better. But your operations leaders, your CEO, your C-suite, their involvement is less frequent, but just as important, because it's focused on how the overall line is working. Again, those choke points, those bottlenecks where things are slowing down, they're still doing that work. But rather than wasting it on thinking about every single box, like the old school approach would have it, in the new school approach, your leadership's time, your high skill labor, really just needs to focus on where is the bottleneck in the process. Where are things slowing down? Where are things getting overdue? Focus on fixing that and let the team focus on optimizing how their work is actually done. It's a division of labor. It's democratic as opposed to dictatorship. Ooh, and I should say, I'm still working on writing my own book for how to systemize small businesses, but until that is published, you can learn about my approach in the video below. It's a 1-hour webinar that goes through my entire strategy, essentially my book in video format, all for free in the description below. But wait, once you systemize, whether it's top down, like the boys suggest, or bottom up, like I suggest, you run into the next challenge. How do you actually make things better now that you've started to figure out what's happening? That is what I cover in this video on the end screen. Watch that next, and until next time, enjoy the process. Okay. I think I'm done. Did we get enough? Did you have enough yet?